and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And our guest for this evening is Joe Lewels. And we'll be talking about UFOs, DNA, the nature of reality, and more. We may go a bit off the UFO topic, but it's going to be interesting. Speaking of going off the UFO topic, I keep saying that I'm going to have another show, and I may eventually. I want to get through. I'm going to be hitting the road, going out to Phoenix and out to California, and hopefully do a show out in California or Oregon in February. So I want to get through the month of January before I decide to do anything. I may just do an extra hour, an hour afterwards of my regular show. I'm not really sure. But I'll keep you in the loop with decisions that I will be making on that. Speaking of changes, I'm sure if you haven't listened for a while, I mean, we still have people trying to access their Joyride account, which closed in September. So I realize that not everyone listens to every single show. So I have to repeat some things. So we all out there hear it. And we're no longer on the Dark Matter Digital Network live. However, we are still on there. We're on there Thursday evenings from 9 until 11 p.m. It's just the chat room will not be active because we're not going to be live. But our live show is on podcastufo.com, and right on the sidebar there's a little player. We're taking phone calls. We're looking into a phone screening situation. We tried something last week. It didn't work. There is some software out there we're looking into. So there'll be more on that later. If you want to connect with us, the easiest way to connect tonight, if you'd like to speak to Joe Lewels, is Skype. And I'm going to be using Podcast UFO as my username. So Skype in that username on Skype. No calls this evening. Again, we're trying to work all that out. Okay, and again, speaking of the Dark Matter Digital Network, it looks like that network is going to carry on. I spoke with Keith Rowland, and he's pretty optimistic about keeping it rolling, and Heather Wade is at the helm as far as Art Bell's show. From what I understand, people are starting to warm up to her and like her. So anyway, don't forget, while you're listening live, to jump in our chat room at podcastufo.com and join in the conversation, ask our guests some questions and all that. And it's time to bring in my good buddy, Alejandro Rojas. How are you?
I am doing well. So, exciting guest tonight. And you're going to talk about DNA. Do you know, I'm from the ghetto. I'm not sure if you know that. And
no.
Do you know what DNA stands for in the ghetto? The nasty.
Oh.
So you say, hey, DNA, and that means, ooh.
The nasty.
Go do the nasty.
Wow.
Just kidding. I don't know if it means that. I just thought of that. And I'm a little delirious because I'm so swamped with, we are really just going crazy getting ready for this Congress. And I'm so busy with signing people up, signing up vendors, fixing the website, doing this, doing that, and really excited about Joe Lewels speaking there.
Yeah, now that's right, he is speaking there. That's one of the reasons I have him on the show this evening. Now, you're doing a lot of you had last year you had Maureen and Jason to help you. And this year you're doing a lot of the work on your own. You must feel overwhelmed.
Well, it is a lot of work, but we still have Michael Klein, who does our video editing. He helps, and then Angela Rayo, who is the owner's daughter. She was actually the editor-in-chief for the magazine, but she does a lot of work. In fact, she's taking most of the calls. If you call in to register, you're probably going to talk to her. She's organizing the travel and everything for the speakers and a bunch of other stuff. So she is super hard at work as well. So, yeah, all of us are here, are really busy. And then at the conference, we have this wonderful group of volunteers. So just a lot of great people that it's always fun to see. And so I'm just so dang excited.
Yeah, it's going to be a really good one. I am too. I decided last week that I am going to make a road trip. I was going to fly out there.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm going to make a road trip, and because I don't like winter in New England, I'll be honest with you. I'm just not a fan of it. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to be driving. I'm leaving early, heading out to Phoenix, and then doing the live show is going to be out there on Wednesday the 17th. Then heading north, I spoke with James Fox the other day, may connect with someone in the San Francisco area, or I may go all the way up to Oregon.
Wow.
I'm excited. It'll be, 2.5, 3 weeks on the road and getting the heck out of the cold winter for a little while anyway.
Yeah, fun. That sounds like that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I like road trips. I'm not, I don't mind flying, but I like to see the country. I've been across the country a whole bunch of times and really enjoy it.
Yeah, road trips are fun.
Right. And always like being out in California this time of year as well. It's going to be a lot better than here. So we don't have too much going on for news. Did you have any story at all?
Yeah, I've got a couple.
Oh, okay, good. All right, why don't you hit on them and we'll chit-chat a little more and call it a day.
Yeah, so one of them I think we talked about earlier, but this is Kansas City, this band from 1978, this sighting. These cool band dudes are hanging out in Kansas City after a gig. I don't know if it was after a gig, actually. But they took a smoke break about 8 p.m., and they noticed this bright light above them. It was coming towards them. They said it got really large, and they could see that it was a triangular craft, or at least a delta wing craft, that they said hovered silently above them for at about 50 feet. So really close. Then they said these two globes were hanging from the aircraft, and that this craft moved towards a storm that was often off in the distance. The glowing orbs got really bright, and it disappeared.
Do you know what kind of storm it was?
It was an electrical storm.
Ah, so it was powering up, recharging.
Perhaps.
You never know. Hey, I know we talked about that on your show earlier this week a little bit, but you know what? It's fascinating to hear these earlier triangle crafts because you don't hear so much about them in earlier times.
Yeah, I mean, I was only 5 years old at the time, so I don't recall the state of ufology at the time. I was more concerned about my diapers, probably.
Yeah.
At 5, do you wear diapers at that age?
You may have.
I may have.
I'm not sure.
But you're right. In the 90s, triangles got really popular. Of course, David Marler is the expert on this, and he's found triangle cases going way back into the past. In fact, he's got this one from New Mexico that he talks about that he's researching right now. So you're right. It wasn't as popular then. However, triangle type craft are being seen so often these days. Right.
And didn't you say that they stated that it almost looked like it went into another dimension, it disappeared?
They said that it disappeared, and I think they did suggest that perhaps another dimension. But, it disappeared.
And another thing, I guess there is a few accounts that I remember there was one desert sighting where I believe it might have been a landed UFO craft or some type of craft that people were seeing go in and out of view right in front of them. I don't know if you recall that particular case.
No, I don't recall that one. But, speaking of the electrical storm and the lightning, you make a good – they good point about power. I mean, it makes me think of Back to the Future and how they powered the DeLorean. But there's so much, energy in the lightning storm.
Oh, yeah.
These guys did think that perhaps the lightning was recharging this craft. And who knows? I wonder if that sort of technology is even feasible. And I don't even know if there are scientists working on harnessing the energy of a lightning blast right now. But that would make sense.
Yeah, I know there's so much lightning going on. I mean, this is something Tesla you could think of would be working on or something like that. But there is so many. There's always lightning storms continually around the world. There's something like 100 lightning strikes per second, or 8 million per day around the world, which is quite amazing.
Mm-hmm. Well, that means anywhere that if you had a technology like that, it would you'd be able to recharge anywhere. There is another case from Florida that we posted just yesterday.
Oh, good.
And, yeah, this is a video, and this person saw 4 spheres that he says were in a diamond pattern. The video, you can't tell much. It's pretty short, and you do see these 4 different objects, and we have some still photos on the picture of it. This was in 2014 that the person saw it, about 11 p.m., February 25th. And, the MUFON closes as an unknown. It almost looks like it possibly could be Chinese lanterns, but, there's not enough video to tell for sure. And the witness says that one of the lights went out of formation, went by one of the other lights, and then came back into formation. And he said that they were moving pretty quickly. He even thought they were moving as fast as jets, but that they were completely silent so that they weren't jets. So, here the witness testimony is what makes it sound like it wouldn't be Chinese lanterns. But unfortunately, the video, as usual, because it's difficult to get these lights in the night sky, it's difficult to tell.
Now, was there any other witness corroboration?
Not that I know of.
Yeah.
Not that was mentioned in this story.
Right. I mean, when something like that happens, the first thing I think of is, well, why didn't they get someone? Or, is there someone local nearby? They could have said, hey, come on, check this out. But also, I know what it's like having my own sighting, that afterwards is when you said, I should have done this, I should have done that. But during a sighting, I think you're so bewildered that it's hard to, figure out what the heck to do.
Yeah, I know. During my
stare.
sighting, at least one of my most, exciting sighting, that's all I did was stare, whereas at least one other person smart enough to run to the car and to get binoculars.
Yeah. It's like, I having conversations with Ray Stanford. He never, ever goes out the door without a video camera and a camera with him. Mm-hmm. And it's actually seen, I think there's been 3 sightings he's had around Goddard Space Center.
Wow. That gives me an idea. So, and it's just because I've been thinking about Doug Trumbull a lot, and he's got that UFOTOG vehicle, the Hummer,
right,
with all the camera and gear on it. Maybe instead of the next incarnation of UFOTOG being, I think they're doing like a smaller 3-foot round kind of disc.
Right.
Maybe it should be a helmet. So you have a helmet with all these cameras and this gear attached to it. So when you're walking around
at the mall or wherever,
wherever, mall, outside, then as people are walking around, you would have all this telemetry on your head to capture.
And then, people, what a great conversation starter and fashion statement. And also, people would say, oh, where'd you get that? I want one too.
Exactly.
Hey,
and think about if you would have had a UFOTOG helmet during your sighting.
I wouldn't even have to think about it.
Wouldn't that have been great?
That would have just done it all for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see these on Amazon pretty soon. What do you think? Yeah.
We'll have to talk to Doug and Marker about that.
Yeah, we'll have to do that. Let's take over their marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Good
while
idea.
they're out there. Yeah. Hey, the sound quality on this show on my side here may not be the best. I had to move out of my studio. It's being the walls I was living in my recording studio out there with just insulated walls, and now the wallboard's gone up. It's being painted, all that. So I'm back in my house, so not quite the sound quality as out there, but a little bit warmer.
Sounds good to me.
Does it? Good. All right. Well, is that it this evening for...
That's it. That's all the news that I have. I haven't even had time to write stories, but for next week, I will have a great story regarding John Greenwald.
John Greenwald. Good old John Greenwald.
Of the Black Vault. So
right.
This is exciting stuff.
I want to ask you some questions like, does it have anything to do with the Project Blue Book papers or anything like that? But you probably can't answer me.
I could, but I won't.
Okay. All right, a cliffhanger for next week.
Uh-huh.
All right, so I'm going to get a lot of hate mail for that. Thanks, man.
No, they're going to love it. They're going to tune into next week. They're going to love the story. It's going to be good stuff.
All right. Well, I trust you, man. So thanks a lot, and we'll be talking to you next week, Alejandro.
All right, talk to you next week, buddy.
All right, so hang in there, everyone. After this quick music break, we'll be right back with Joe Lewels. Well, that music is part of a longer clip by actually a fan of the show that's sent a bunch of clips our way. His name is Bruce Rainier. Thank you, Bruce. And we'll be feeding his music in with Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse's music that he supplies as well for the show, and possibly from someone else a little later on. Well, here we are with Joe Lewels. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Joe, you're going to have to talk into your phone just a little bit louder, if you would.
Okay. All right.
So
is that better?
I have someone listening in that's going to let me know in just a second. But, Joe, why don't you give the listener who's never heard your name before your background and what got you interested in the UFO topic?
Sure. You think there's people that don't know who I am?
You never know.
Oh, I'm sure there are.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I got interested in getting involved in the UFO phenomenon in 1993 when I went to the Ozark UFO conference in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, and I heard for the first time Dr. John Mack speak. He was really an unknown at that time. Of course, most of your listeners, I'm sure, know that he was the late Dr. John Mack. Unfortunately, he was a professor of psychiatry at Harvard University for more than 40 years. And he was speaking about having worked with over 100 people who had had alien abduction experiences. And he said during that presentation that he had not found any signs of mental delusion or disorder, and that just blew me away. And that's when I got started. Wow.
And is that the topic that you favored at the time, abductions?
Well, I had a couple of sightings myself, but frustrating. Lights in the sky, a spherical black thing that I could not identify. It had no other features, no portholes, nothing during the day. Sightings were very interesting, but I was really interested in going deeper into this phenomenon and getting to know and to work with people who had had actual contact experiences. So from 1993 to about the year 2000, I ran the El Paso chapter of the Mutual UFO Network, and I formed a team consisting of myself, a psychiatrist, Dr. Roberta Fenig, a sociologist who also was a certified hypnotherapist, Dr. Romeo de Benedetto, who has passed, I'm sorry to say, and we began interviewing and doing hypnosis on people who had had the abduction experience. And we did that intensely for a little more than 3 years. We had dozens and dozens of cases that came to us from the Southwest, the New Mexico, West Texas, and even northern Mexico.
There's some type of issue. I know we're on landline, and we set that up ahead of time and all that. I think your portable phone might be having some type of issue, and wanted to ask you if you happen to have another phone in the house, a landline that has hardwired.
No, all of our landlines are the kind you can pick up and walk around the house with.
Yeah. You may want to get a different one. If you have one, you can go grab.
I will give it a try.
Okay.
I'm sorry the connection is not good.
Yeah, it worked fine earlier, but for some reason it's very staticky right now. And I apologize to the live listener.
Okay. Let's give me just a moment.
All right.
And I will run and get another one.
All right. Very good. Don't hang up on this one until you have the other one. All right, so while we're waiting,
just
go ahead.
On the other one.
Yeah, go ahead. What's that?
I'm on another one of the phones.
Oh, you did that already. Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does that sound any better?
Well, we'll see. Why don't you hang up the other one, and we'll...
Yeah, I've already hung up the other one.
Oh, you have? Okay, great. All right, and let's see, you were basically telling what you have done out there, and before we move into other subjects, let's talk quickly about your sightings. You said one was like a dark object, and what was the first one?
Well, the first one was when I was in the military. I was a reconnaissance pilot in the Republic of South Vietnam, 1967-68. Got back to the U.S., fortunately, lived through that. I was flying a night flight in southeast Alabama, heading from Fort Rucker, Alabama, toward the Gulf Coast. And it was just a normal get 3 hours of flying time kind of mission. And myself and the guy that I was flying with, who I was a captain, and the guy I was flying with was my boss. He was a lieutenant colonel. We both saw this spherical orangish ball of light that was way high above us, but must have been very big. Neither of us could identify it. We were really puzzled. It kind of gave us a sense of eeriness. It was a beautiful January or February night. I can't remember, but it was clear as a bell. And then when we turned back around to head back to our base, after about 15 minutes or so, we saw what appeared to be the same sphere out in front of us. So it seemed to be following us, but it never got close. It was always at a distance, and we really were baffled, both of us. And those are the kinds of things that they open your mind up to the whole issue, but they don't really give you any answers. And those are the kinds of things that are so frustrating to me that I really wanted to focus on the actual contact experience. Now, one of the things that I didn't say when I got started tonight was my background is that besides having been an Army aviator and also I was the editor of the Freedom of Information Digest at the University of Missouri School of Journalism while I was getting my Ph.D. in journalism there. And I was a writer and editor for the U.S. Army Aviation Digest magazine while I was for a couple of years. Later, I taught at the University of Texas at El Paso journalism, and I was head of the journalism department there. So I've had kind of a varied background. Mostly, I would say, I would see myself as more of a sociologist and a social psychologist, someone who's very interested in how society reacts to phenomena, and in this case, the UFO phenomena is very, very interesting subject matter to me, and also the psychological aspects of it.
Well, so you'll have something to talk about at the UFO Congress with Dr. Ron Westrom.
I know Dr. Ron Westrom, and I will have things to talk about with him. I think there's going to be some great speakers at this conference next month. Jacques Vallée,
I know.
Very well-known first early researcher in UFOs, is going to be there and speaking. I don't think he has spoken at a conference for 30 years, as far as I know. Just great, really interesting people, and I think people who are listening here, if they can get to Phoenix in February, they're going to be doing themselves a favor. It's going to be a good conference, and the weather's probably going to be nice. Yeah.
I don't think they're going to be able to top this year, really, because, first of all, they have one of the people from the Ariel school incident, who's now a young adult. David Jacobs is always a favorite, Doug Trumbull, David Hatcher-Childress, Mark D'Antonio, of course, Jacques Vallée, Lee Spiegel, Merrill Cook, Nick Redfern, Chase Klitsky, a good friend of mine, Sam Maranto. He was formerly on this show, and it goes on and on and on. John Greenwald, great people this year. I don't think they're ever going to be able to top it, really, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to it, and my topic is going to be UFOs and religion.
I think that came up two podcasts or so ago. Someone wanted me, first of all, to thank you for your military service.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate the comment.
Yeah, and also, before we move on, I would like to talk a little bit more about that sighting. It sounds almost like a Foo Fighter to me, the way you're describing it. But what was the reaction of the fellow crew members, and was it reported, and did you talk about it to your superiors or anything like that, or was it just dropped?
This is very interesting. We both were baffled about what it was. We had no clue. We knew what it wasn't. We went through all the things that it wasn't. But no, we didn't report it. We weren't stupid. I mean, we knew what happens to pilots that report UFOs. That's never good for your career. And so we did not report it, and we both just kept quiet about it.
Wow. That's really too bad.
Yeah. And, we never saw it move. It was in one place one moment, then a few minutes later it was in another place. And it was just bizarre. What's interesting is that when we were flying towards the Gulf Coast, we approached the area around Pensacola and Gulf Breeze that later, many years later, became famous for all the sightings there. Right,
yeah. Excuse me, a little bit of controversial sightings. I hear all kinds of different sides about that. But I know at least some of the Gulf Breeze sightings were unexplainable for sure.
I believe so, but I've spoken to some of the witnesses, but this is the problem with sightings. It's very hard. You can't hardly ever verify anything. Occasionally you get sightings that are up close and very obviously they are some kind of craft not of this world. Those are rare. And what interests me in all the research that I've done, I've studied a lot of cases of alien abduction. Many of the people who've had those experiences never have seen a UFO. Okay,
right.
So but yet there's a treasure trove of information there. And I have to say that the people that the cases that we investigated were very, very good cases. There were multiple witness cases. There were whole families of people who had these experiences, and I'm talking grandfathers and parents and children and cousins, aunts and uncles. I mean, the whole families were involved in these things, and I don't think there's any psychological explanation for that. And there's also no psychological explanation for cases where two or more persons share a missing time experience, unless they happen to be drunk or on drugs or in a crash of some kind. But that wasn't the case with the cases we were studying. People, four people in a car traveling from El Paso to Tucson. They had 3 hours missing time. All three of them verified that they had that missing time. They had a UFO sighting, and then 3 hours is gone. And we were able to do hypnosis on one of the individuals. The others weren't interested in doing that. And we really learned a lot about, what transpired during those missing time hours. And so we had really, really good cases of people who are not just honest, but they're people who are highly functional, people who professionals, executives, people who really in every way are sane and past the evaluations that our psychiatrist made of them. So, that was really the most important thing for me. We did not, as the MUFON group here, we did not go out chasing lights. We were focusing on the experiencers. They became our speakers at our meetings and became really good speakers. Some of them went on to speak at big conferences. So that was one of our goals, was to build up their self-esteem to the point where they could go out and talk about it to other people.
Right. One of the things you hear, people will explain away all the abduction encounters or experiences as sleep paralysis, but then you have, the daytime things that happen, like you just mentioned, driving in the car, and that's not the only one I've heard about. Being in a car.
We didn't, the cases that we had daytime experiences and experiences where they were with other people, and, a lot of childhood experiences where they were with other kids, and we were able to verify that other kids there also saw craft. And in one case that I relate in my first book on the subject, which is called The God Hypothesis, this 8-year-old girl was outside playing in the summer. It was summer, and they were out playing barefoot, and a whole bunch of them out there, and they all saw this craft that was hovering quietly above the trees nearby. It was dark. It was black. And then there's a period of missing time, and this one girl, the one that we were doing the work with, she is missing for 3 or 4 hours, and they called the police. There's a search party out looking for her, and then eventually she just walks in the house, and she doesn't know, she didn't remember that there was missing time. She had no idea, but she had a big scoop mark in her ankle. It looked like a deep mark. She didn't know where she got it, and it healed up within a couple of days, and it never hurt her, and she still bears that scar. And that's one of the telltale signs of the phenomenon, that there are marks, scoop marks, oftentimes needle marks, bruises, a lot of physical evidence that goes along with this phenomenon.
Sure seems to. I mean, you definitely hear about that, and there was someone showing at the conference last year some of the so-called scoop marks. They said exactly the same thing. Someone wanted to know if you were giving John Mack as an example, or did you ever have any connection or do any work with him?
Oh, yeah. John Mack and I became good friends. After he spoke at that conference in the Ozark Conference in Eureka Springs in '93, that's what motivated me to start doing my own research, because I wanted to see if what I found was what he had found and what others had found. And we did. We found many cases right here in our own backyard that substantiated what others were saying about this. Ultimately, I was asked to speak at different conferences, and in '96, I believe, '95, or maybe it was '95 or '96, I can't remember. John Mack and I were both speaking at a big conference in Brisbane, Australia, and Whitley Strieber was there, and Jaime Maussan, and many of the big names in abduction research. And we really bonded during that week. And John Mack ultimately wrote an endorsement for my book, The God Hypothesis, and so did Whitley Strieber, and I really appreciated that. And then later on, I worked with John Mack on a couple of projects. One of them was traveling with him to Mexico to investigate some cases down there. We spent a week traveling together in Mexico City and thereabouts. Jaime Maussan of Mexico City fame helped us. He was with us part of the time. That was really interesting. He wrote about that trip in his second book called Passport to the Cosmos, and I mentioned it as, and I'm acknowledged in it. I helped by reading the manuscript and giving him some, critique, and then we were working together. Just before he got killed in 2004, he had asked me to work with him on giving a presentation at the Laughlin UFO conference in 2005, and it was going to be about the reptilians, and we called it the Reptilian Project. He wanted to come out and do a big presentation and write maybe a book about reptilians that appear in many, many abduction cases. He, myself, and Barbara Lamb, a researcher from California, who's had a lot of cases that have reptilians, we all were going to pitch in together with our data, and then we were going to present it at the Laughlin conference. However, we were going to meet in August of 2004 when he got back from the trip to London. Unfortunately, he was killed by a drunk driver when he stepped off the curb while he was in London, and we never got to have that meeting. But Barbara Lamb and I went ahead and presented our material on the reptilians at that conference in 2005 in Laughlin, Nevada.
Wow. Hey, listen, just a minute ago we had quite a bit of static again. And a lot of times on these portable landline phones, there is a channel switch where you can switch channels. Can you just take a quick second and look at that phone keyboard and see if you see anything that says a channel switch?
Sure.
Okay.
Hold on.
And then we have some questions here.
You know what? I see a noise reduction switch.
Go ahead and try it. Yeah, we'd rather stay away from the static if we possibly can. You sound nice and clear right now.
I pushed noise reduction. I don't know if that helped any.
Yeah, I hope we'll just go along here. It's not bad enough to call you back on your cell phone, but hopefully it'll go away.
The other button you were looking for was what now?
Channel. A lot of times you can switch a channel on a frequency.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I do not see.
That's okay.
Anywhere on this phone a channel.
All right.
Where I can switch channels. I'm sorry.
No problem. I sometimes, I have a bit of a hard time sometimes when it comes into like the reptilians and all the different varieties and all that. But what is your, you just mentioned it just a minute ago. So what is your, and of course I'm not going to bash you or anything for your beliefs or thoughts or anything like that, but what is your thoughts on the reptilians?
Well, let me explain that. From the very get-go, when we started doing our research and working with these I like to call them experiencers rather than abductees, because that abductee is such a negative term. In fact, a lot of these folks don't think that they're abductees. They don't like the term. They've learned or they somehow came to the understanding that they are participants rather than abductees. But we started getting reptilian cases almost immediately, okay? And, I continue to get reptilian cases referred to me. So this isn't a belief. This is information. This is data that has come to me that I compiled and I wrote about in my book, The God Hypothesis. I spent a lot of time on the reptilians in that book. And I went way back into the history of the human race and discovered that we've had a relationship with reptilian beings for millions of years, probably, but at least thousands of years. And they appear in the Bible, okay? They appear in the ancient Jewish writings that are outside of the Bible. They appear in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And there's plenty of reason to believe that there are sentient reptilian beings that have interacted with the human race for thousands of years.
Now, someone up on the message board was asking if any of the experiencers see anything strange with the eye movements of these beings.
If they see eye movement?
Yeah, if they've ever described any eye movements. I have no idea if it's something he's looked into or why the question came up. But
well, I will tell you that even when they're in trance, under hypnosis, there's a great reluctance for them when you ask them to look at their faces. They don't want to look. They're terrified, okay? And so they don't typically make eye contact with them. It's only if the beings themselves jam their faces right in front of them and just stare into their eyes. And that staring has been reported by a lot of researchers. I don't remember someone saying his eyes are moving. That would be kind of strange if they did say something like that. And let me make sure that you understand something else, Mark, and that your listeners understand. When my team got together and decided to do this research, we did not go into it with any fixed idea of what we were going to find. We were going to just follow the data. We were going to report what we found, and not if it turned out that it was all a bunch of crap, we were going to say that. Okay. In fact, the psychiatrist that we were working with, she knew nothing of the subject, had never read a book, and she was just sure, she was positive she was going to be able to figure this out very quickly, because she knew in her mind that these people were going to be the kind of people who fabricated or hallucinated or had showed some kind of mental disorder. The problem with it was that after she had interviewed maybe a dozen or so, she came to me and she said, "You know what? They're not crazy. There's no reason to think of these people as being hoaxers or people who are trying to sound important, or none of them wanted anybody to know that they were working with us. They were not seeking publicity. They were not hoaxers, and there were multiple witnesses that backed up their stories. So, one of the first cases, for example, was a woman who had had experiences since she was a child, and she had a journal of what had happened to her. But the first story that she told us was the story that happened just recently in her life, that she had woken up one morning recently, and that she woke up in her nightgown lying on top of her bed, but the bed was completely made up, okay? And she couldn't figure that out, how that could happen. She was married. Her husband wasn't there. She called him at work and asked him, hey, did you make the bed up? And he said, yeah, I made it up. And she says, well, why? He says, well, you weren't around, and I just thought you had gone to work early. So what happened is she was missing. He assumed she went to work early. He made up the bed. Later, she was returned by the beings, and they just laid her on top of a completely made-up bed. And this happens at times. They're not perfect. They don't do everything perfectly. But, there's a good example of a situation where you have two witnesses to an event, and some people might say, well, that's no big deal. She could have done it in her sleep or something. But in this case, she had so many other experiences to go along with that it stood out as being something quite remarkable to us.
Wow, yeah. That is something you hear of stories of people saying that two people are taken at the same time and their clothes is kind of mixed up, and they're wondering what's going on, that type of thing.
Yeah.
There's a couple of questions up on the message board, and one wanted to know, how are the reptilians referred to, if they are, in the Bible and Hebrew texts?
Okay. I'll give you a really good example, and let's talk about Adam and Eve and being tempted to eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And who is it that tempted them?
Snake.
Well, it was a serpent, right? A serpent, but not just a regular serpent. This was a sentient serpent that was giving them to eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And this serpent being, after this happened, then in the Bible, God says, well, okay, your punishment from now on, serpent, is that you're going to have to crawl on your belly from now on, which indicates that this serpent being, before that, did not crawl on his belly. So I think the very first mention of a serpent being is in the story of Adam and Eve. But there are others, and in particularly, there's a lot of there is an epithet in the Bible that you find in many places, where a person who's evil is called a son of a serpent. Okay, and there's also in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is a mention of a vision that a Jewish patriarch had, where he saw two what he called watchers, and the watchers are something we can talk about in a minute. These are beings of the angelic realm that they believe were of the angelic realm. And he saw two watchers who were wrestling over his soul. And one of them was human-looking, but the other one, he says, had the visage of a viper. So there's another reference in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's other references in Jewish writings going way back 3,000 years or more. And then if you look at the writings of the Sumerians, in the Sumerian literature, the texts that are the oldest writings that we know of, they're in cylinder seals there are in clay tablets that are very, very old. There are drawings of the beings that were interacting with the Sumerians, the creator beings. One of those beings was called Enki, E-N-K-I, and Enki was considered the being who was responsible for creating the human race by intermingling the genetics of being ape men or monkeys or whatever was here on Earth back then with some of their DNA apparently to create the human race. And Enki, the Sumerian god, is depicted as a snake being, a serpent being. So I go through all of this in detail in my book, The God Hypothesis, and I would refer anybody that's interested in that to go there. You can get it on Amazon.com. It's still in publication, and I spent a lot of time on that. Let me just change the subject a bit here,
Sure.
if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem.
Mark.
It's Martin, by the way.
Martin, I'm sorry, Martin.
That's no problem.
Martin, when we were doing our research and we were coming up with all this stuff, this interesting information about what happens to people when they're abducted or taken, we were getting information that was very similar to what the mainstream researchers were writing about. And I'm talking about Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs primarily because they became the go-to guys for alien abduction. They wrote a bunch of books and they have quite a following. But we were finding not only what they were writing about, which was the hybridization program where the beings are creating hybrid babies. We found that in many cases, but we were finding stuff that they weren't writing about. And those there's three things I call the forbidden R's of ufology. The letter R, okay? And those are religion, reincarnation, and reptilians. They weren't writing about those things. Those guys were writing about UFOs as if they first appeared 50, 60 years ago when the atomic age started, okay? They were writing about it as if these were aliens from another planet that were here trying to take over the Earth, etc. A very negative view. But they weren't talking about reptilians, and they never mentioned that. They weren't talking about anything to do with religion going back thousands of years, which we were finding. And thirdly, they weren't saying anything about reincarnation. And I just never could believe that they weren't getting cases where people were remembering past lives, because as soon as we were working with people under hypnosis, they very many times they would spontaneously go to a past life that would help to explain to them why this is happening to them. And
Joe, just 1 second. We're getting static again, and I'm wondering if you are near any router or modem or anything like that. I'm trying to figure out why this would be happening on your portable landline. Are you near any
the
computer?
router is on the other side of the house.
Okay. What about a computer or anything else?
I have a laptop nearby.
Yeah. Okay. Did you just move? I wondered if you can move maybe perhaps to a different chair or something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll give that a try. Is
this any better now?
No, it's actually
no. Okay.
Yep.
It's these phones, It's just terrible. That's why I always prefer to use my cell phone.
Yeah, well, we may have to switch to that. We may have to switch to that if that, if this keeps up.
Well, I'm so sorry. I'm at a loss about what to do about this.
Yeah, right now it sounds pretty good, so we'll just keep going on. And I'm not sure if you remember exactly where you were just then.
Yeah, I was just saying that we found that we were getting a lot of information from our subjects that was not being reported by the other major abduction researchers. And we finally concluded that because we kept getting the same stuff coming up over and over and over again, having to do with past lives, reincarnation of the soul, and the issue of the ancient nature of this phenomena and the intervention that these beings did in the long ago past in human evolution to create the human race. We were finding this in many cases, and none of that was coming up in the writings of the two major researchers. And ultimately, we had to come to the conclusion that they were just they were either for whatever reason they were not reporting those things. They were putting those things in the trash can, or they didn't want to talk about those things because their theory that this was an alien invasion, beings from another planet that got here 50, 60 years ago, would be totally debunked if they started talking about these other things. And I think what another part of it is, anytime you as a scientist or a researcher of any kind, that you go into your research with preconceived notions of reality. And, I believe that they simply had a preconceived notion of a material world. And that was it, okay? And we didn't. We just reported what we found. And what we found opened up new avenues of understanding the UFO and the alien abduction phenomena.
Now, when you, just a minute ago, you started talking about the 3 R's, did you go through that entire?
Yeah, there was the 3 R's. These are the forbidden R's of UFO research. Those are religion, reincarnation,
okay,
and
all right. I'm sorry. Yes, you did. Yeah. Now, we are going to break at the top of the hour just in a second. But one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was if we can go into the subject of DNA, because I know that's part of...
very interesting topic.
Yeah. So why don't we get that started?
All right. Well, in 1981, Francis Crick, who was the co-founder of the double helix nature of the DNA molecule, he and James Watson were both won the Nobel Prize for that. But in 1981, Francis Crick wrote a book called Life Itself. And this is where he began to question the origins of the DNA molecule. What he found was that the DNA molecule was extraordinarily complex. The DNA molecule requires 2 different sets of code or language that are incompatible. In other words, it's like someone speaking Chinese and someone speaking Native American Navajo, and they don't communicate. And one of these codes is formed by proteins, and the other one is formed by the amino acids. The only way that the molecule itself, the DNA molecule, can work is if there is a translator. It needed a translator to translate between amino acid code and protein code. And somehow a translator got in the picture. And the translator were enzymes. Excuse me. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a chemist. I'm just repeating what Francis Crick found. And he said, that's so complicated that it is impossible for that to actually have appeared by accident on this planet. He said that it would be impossible. He did a computer study to find out what the odds were of a molecule that complex forming by accident, and he found that the odds against that ever happening was a number so big that it would be equal to the number of atoms in the universe.
Oh, jeez.
So he said it was not an accident, okay? Somebody made the DNA molecule, or possibly if it ever did evolve, it wasn't on this planet, because DNA has not changed in the billions of years that the planet has been around. And the evidence for that is that there is ample fossil record of bacteria that are just like the bacteria today, and that hasn't changed since the planet was formed. He found no evidence for the evolution of the DNA molecule, and he believed that the DNA molecule had to come from outer space, and someone had to have made it. It's a created molecule. And so he thought, what he says in his book, that some highly intelligent beings had to have brought it here or sent it here by rockets and seeded the Earth with the DNA molecule, because that's the only way that he could see that it could survive traveling through space. Now, today, people think that, no, the DNA could have survived coming in on a comet or an asteroid. It's hardier than we ever thought. But Crick himself called the beings that he believed seeded life on Earth, he called them cosmic game wardens. Cosmic game wardens. And I think that's a pretty good word, pretty good term for them. I think that there are beings who are cosmic game wardens, and they're called by different names in ancient texts. They're called watchers in the Dead Sea Scrolls and even in the Bible. They're called the Anunnaki by the Sumerians. There are all kinds of terms that are used for them. Even the term sons of God are mentioned in the Bible many, many times as being beings who were created by God and not born of women. And these are angelic or just higher beings than humans. So in my second book, called Rulers of the Earth, Secrets of the Sons of God, I talk about the watchers and the sons of God of the ancient literature, and I make the point that today the beings that are interacting with humans fit that description very well. One of the things that really struck me was when, Whitley Strieber wrote the book Communion, right?
Yeah.
And that book was a bestseller on the nonfiction list of the New York Times for 10 months.
Wow.
It affected people worldwide. I'm very fortunate to be a good friend of Whitley Strieber. And in that book, he was able to ask the beings, who are you? And the answer that he got just chilled him to the bone, because the response from them was, we recycle souls.
Mm. Well, all right. Well, we're just a little past the top of the hour, so we're going to take just a second here. And thanks for this so much. So if in the second part of the show, we might talk about the holographic universe, the true nature of reality, and the illusion of scientific method and objectivity. Okay, everyone, that's it for this part of the show. If you'd like to support the show for only $2 or more per month, go to podcastufo.com and click on the support menu. All that information's right there. You can play it on any media player, your iPhone, etc. It's a one-time sign-up. You can also do, instead of a per month, you can do per year, a one-time payment per year. That seems to be easy for a lot of people, or easier, I should say. Anyway, thanks for listening. We appreciate every single listener. We don't have a guest confirmed next week yet. We have someone we're just waiting to hear back. And I have a few people to thank. First of all, Keith Rowland for running our show on the Dark Matter Digital Network. I want to thank Peggy for running the Facebook page, Bruce Rainier for the music, and Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse for the music. Remember, you can always listen to the full show for free live every Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thanks a lot, and this is Martin Willis saying keep your eyes to the sky, and that's right, I'm supposed to say something different. Keep your eyes to the sky and your feet firmly planted. That was a suggestion from a listener. See you next week.